Veteran buys a peaceful Nebraska farm until his dog discovers why the neighbors are evacuating. Late summer looks harmless from the highway. Bright corn, a white farmhouse, windmills ticking like wristwatches. But as Caleb turns down the gravel lane, the first wrong note hits. Birds are silent. Titan, his Belgian Malinois, leans forward on the seat, nostrils working, tail low like he recognizes a command. Caleb hasn't given. A hand-painted sign lies face down in the ditch. He flips it, evacuation route, smeared with mud. He tells himself small towns scare easily. He tells himself this place is a restart, not another battlefield. Titan vaults out, ranges left, then freezes, ears pinned at the creek that slices the property. The water looks clean. It also smells like a new battery. Caleb kneels, tiny bubbles comb the surface, as if something breathes below. He cups water, lets it run through his fingers, and they tingle. Titan drinks before Caleb can stop him, 2 gulps and goes rigid. The dog folds as if a trapdoor opens inside him. Paws drum, his jaws clench. Caleb slides a glove between his teeth so he won't bite his tongue and whispers, "I've got you. Stay." From under the cut bank, something glints. A pipe hides there, narrow as a broom handle, painted the color of mud. Someone taped a plastic tag to it, the kind on feed sacks. A date. Yesterday. On the far ridge, a moving truck grinds away from a neighbor's place. Their windows are boarded from the inside. The barn door carries a chalk X, the kind Caleb used to mark cleared rooms overseas. Only this one points toward his creek. He looks back at Titan's shuddering ribs, then at the pipe exhaling a clear thread. This isn't a runoff, it's a message. A phone buzzes in his pocket. "Unnamed caller," he answers. A man whispers, "You're already late. What happens next will shock you." Late summer clamped a wavering haze over the Nebraska flats, a bright weight that made distance shimmer, cicadas grinding like tiny engines in the hedgerows. Caleb turned from the county road onto a lane that sliced corn in a chalk stripe. His shoulders easing, despite the heat. 120 acres waited at the end of the ruts. A rickety farmhouse, a leaning barn, a creek hidden by cottonwoods. He had bought the place because quiet seemed possible here. Not the kind earned by earplugs, but the kind grown into wood and soil. Titan, his Belgian Malinois, rode shotgun, eyes forward, muscles loose until needed. The dog understood starts and endings better than most people. Caleb knew, a land like this could teach them both how to breathe without flinching. He parked, killed the engine, and let the silence settle. Titan, a Belgian Malinois with a dark mask and intelligent eyes, stepped down without jumping, as if the dirt itself mattered. The dog mapped the yard in slow arcs, nose working, head swiveling, a professional at a new job. Caleb checked the porch, boards flexed, a screen door rasped, a wasp traced a figure 8 near a crooked porch light. Paint had surrendered to the sun, leaving the gray wood bare. The roof dipped near the chimney, where bricks had loosened and leaned together like old brothers. Beyond the yard, corn stood in endless ranks, tassels catching light and rattling like paper charms. He listened for traffic and heard none, only wind threading leaves and a distant freight horn rolling across the flats. Inside, light fell in long stripes. Dust lay like soft felt on the mantel, and glowed in every beam. A rust ring shaded the sink drain. A ball jar sat on the sill, holding a marigold someone had forgotten months ago. The air carried mildew with the sweeter note of old pine. Caleb opened windows, propped doors, and walked the rooms with the same method he used, clearing structures overseas. Corners first, thresholds next, closets last. Memory tried to overlay heat-blurred images of another house that had smelled like smoke and solvent. He blinked and kept moving. He didn't want to name the tremor in his fingers, so he measured his breath instead, the way medics had taught him when a blast stole his hearing, and left a whistle that never fully quit. He rolled his mattress out near the hearth, set a metal bowl and poured water. Titan waited for a nod, lapped, and looked up with the steady attention that had once steadied Caleb under fire. They were a team because listening ran both directions. Point, watch, hold. Simple commands that had become a shared language. Caleb touched the dog's chest, felt the slow engine there, and remembered a night when mortar smoke hid stars and Titan had found a passage where maps said there wasn't one. That memory came with a taste of copper and diesel. He let it pass like a train that didn't stop at this town. He wanted a different timetable now, one set by weather and chores, not checkpoints and curfews. Outside he walked a perimeter. The barn leaned south, siding loose at the eaves, a weathercock frozen crooked. Wind combed the corn into waves that traveled toward the creek's green ribbon. A few fence posts tilted like tired men. The dust tasted metallic when gusts came from the draw. Titan paused where the grass changed color, sniffed, then returned to heel without order. The dog's restraint always moved Caleb. Power without waste, teeth without unnecessary use. He listened to the drone of a far tractor, to sparrows arguing under the eaves, to his own breath counting back from 8. Calm didn't come on command, but the land helped. Standing still in bright heat, he felt his pulse slide down from the... A pickup rolled in, faded blue, one fender in primer gray. The driver let it idle, then shut it off and stepped out, palm open at thigh level so the dog could see intent. Titan considered, sniffed, then sat, neutral. The man tipped his hat. "Amos Whitlow," he said, voice like burlap. "Place 2 draws west. Caleb Hart." Caleb answered, "Appreciate you stopping." Neighborly curiosity, Amos said, eyeing the porch line. "You bought character and chores. Paperwork claimed charm." Caleb's "Paperwork sells stories," Amos replied, then glanced toward the cottonwoods. "Water down there used to sing. Lately it coughs." Caleb followed his gaze. "You've tested it?" Amos shrugged. "Greenfield Zinc tested it. They printed glossy charts, shook hands at the fair, paid for school jerseys, and paved a mile of road before the election. A few families moved quickly, trailers packed at dusk, curtains shut by morning. Nobody held a yard sale. That's not how folks leave home unless somebody bought their silence along with their cattle. Titan flicked an ear. Caleb noticed a faint acrid note ride the breeze from the draw, like a battery pressed to the tongue. He kept his tone even. "You think it's deliberate?" "I think profit flows downhill," Amos said. "They gotta plant upriver. Waste has to go somewhere. You're downstream." They walked to the creek. Dragonflies stitched blue above tea-colored water. Under the cut bank, roots gripped soil like hands. Bubbles feathered along a seam that should have run clean. Caleb crouched and watched light catch on corrugation tucked behind roots. Not a fallen can, more like a sleeve hiding a pipe. He didn't touch it. Titan sneezed, backed away 2 steps, and looked to Caleb for a call. The dog's cautious retreat said more than a paragraph of reports. "County inspectors came through," Amos said. They waved toward the plant, and left with coolers labeled "Thank you." "Our sheriff's brother pours concrete for their expansions." "The church got a new roof with a plaque." "My granddaughter waited here and wore a rash for weeks." Clinic blamed the detergent. Caleb stood. "You filed anything?" "EPA hotline," Amos said. "Got a case number." "The paper is tidy. Teeth are expensive." He studied Caleb's face. "You've got the look of someone who takes notes and keeps them straight. Might do this place some good." They went back to the porch. Amos lowered himself onto the step. Titan lay where he could watch both men in the lane. A hawk wrote circles above the far hedge. The heat pressed like a steady hand. Amos talked while cicadas sawed at the edges of hearing. He described wells that turned sour in dry weeks, calves that drank and coughed, leaves that bronzed early on cottonwoods close to the draw. He did not dramatize. He simply placed facts like fence posts, until a line appeared, whether you wanted it or not. That was how truth worked out here. Plain and cumulative. "Why tell me before I've unpacked?" Caleb asked. "Because first impressions last," Amos said. "Also because that dog will notice what men rationalize. He'll save you if you listen. Folks around here respect a handler who hears his partner." Caleb nodded, touched Titan's shoulder, and felt the dog's breath settle with his own. He carried a coil of tension in his neck like a knot, tied years ago. Controlled breathing, thinned it, but stress still flared when engines downshifted or doors slammed. He had learned not to hate the reflex. It kept him honest about limit. He wanted peace and understood that peace required choices made in daylight, not denial. After Amos left, Caleb repaired what he could reach. He planned a sticking door, oiled the hinge until the squeal faded, added a brace to the sagging post, and wrote the work in a note. Writing steadied him, turned hours into proof. He inventoried the barn, found a straight-handled shovel, a dull hatchet, and a roll of wire, then marked a beam that would need sistering. Titan patrolled 100 yards out, circling back on a timer that never drifted, nose reading currents, tail held level. Each return carried the same quiet question, "Are we good?" Each nod answered, "For now." Clouds built in a heap above the horizon, bright edges with slate underside. The air smelled like rain yet stayed dry. Caleb walked to the creek again with 3 clean jars. He filled them at separate points, labeled lids with time and spot, and stowed them in a cooler. He would take them to a lab 2 counties over, where the receptionist didn't wear a company polo. Titan ranged the bank, paused where the sleeve hid, and looked at Caleb as if to underline the obvious. Tonight. Late summer pressed down like a lid, and Caleb worked beneath it, until sweat cut clean paths through the dust on his arms. He stacked the day into plain tasks. Rehang the gate, plane the sticking door, brace the barn beam, because routine fenced his mind as surely as posts and wire. When an engine popped on the highway, or a screen door slammed somewhere in the corn, a spark went through his chest like a tripped flare, but the rhythm of tools steadied him. Titan traced cool arcs around the yard, a Belgian Malinois built for attention, reading the wind the way a sailor reads a mast, marking the lane, the porch, the cottonwoods, then sitting where he could watch everything without moving more than his eyes. The house paid him back in small corrections. Oil turned a hinge from complaint to whisper. A warped plank settled after a careful shave. In the pantry he swept droppings, and found a row of pennies tucked behind a beam, greened by years and luck. Heat anchored on his shoulders like a deliberate hand. Cicadas sawed at the margins. Corn hissed as wind ran the rows. A freight horn rolled a single note across the flats. He counted breath in 4s until the spike behind his ribs eased. The land felt teachable. He could live inside its hours if he listened. Near noon, Titan froze on the south side of the yard, head cocked, tail rigid, nostrils taking short, exacting pulls. Caleb set his hammer down and followed the line the dog cut toward the cottonwoods, where shadow pooled over a narrow creek. At 10 yards the water threw clean light. At 2 yards a sour metallic tang opened behind the tongue, faint as a 9-volt battery tested against the lip. Titan refused the drink without a word, taking one deliberate step back and holding the quiet kind of warning Caleb had learned to trust more than speeches. Bubbles combed the surface where a pale thread slipped from under the cut bank and vanished downstream. He crouched and let the creek's hush fill his ears, until thoughts thinned. Not algae, not heat funk. Something fed that line. He walked back for 3 clean jars and a marker, returned and filled each at a different point. He wrote time and location on the lids, photographed the corrugated sleeve tucked under roots, the bright plastic tag wired to it, the faint fizz that didn't want to be noticed. Then he walked the bank both directions, noting where hoof prints cut damp edge, where tire ruts bit soil at a narrow turnout half hidden by saplings. He bagged a shard of white plastic from a twig and a sliver of adhesive tape, snagged on a evidence, felt thin without a lab, but thin lines braid into rope if you keep them from fraying. Titan moved a pace ahead, pausing as if to say, remember this and this. Afternoon meant manageable task. He drove new screws into a wobbly post, trimmed a hinge until the door settled true, and swept the loft where swallows had kneaded mud into rafters. When wind shifted from the draw, the tang returned sharper now that he knew it. He drank from a warm jug, and named objects when color drained from the world. Post, latch, plane, screw, until the room held. Titan leaned a shoulder into his shin, quiet counterweight, the kind of anchor that doesn't ask for words. Gravel whispered on the lane. A white pickup stopped at the mailbox at an angle that let the driver watch the house without craning. The logo on the door wore a cheerful leaf. Greenfields ink gleamed in fresh paint. The engine. A man in his early 30s stepped down with a clipboard and a matching cap, boots too clean for real work. He raised a hand, as if greeting a neighbor who already owed him a favor. Titan took 3 slow steps and stood between the stranger and the porch. Caleb stayed under the beam, so light fell across the visitor's eyes. Afternoon, the man said. Brock Sutton, welcome to the neighborhood. We like folks to know we're the ones to call for water testing. Gravel, culverts, whatever helps. I'll manage Caleb's free kits, Brock continued, smile steady as a decal. We run them through our lab. Quick turnaround. Peace of mind. Independent. Caleb asked. EPA standards are EPA standards, Brock said, stepping around the point. His gaze drifted toward the cottonwoods. Pretty dry. Family spot before harvest kicks in. Smells off, Caleb said. Heat does that, Brock replied, clicking his pen. He scribbled without watching the page. If you plan on stocking, we subsidize fencing near waterways. Safer for everyone. Everyone who? Caleb asked. Community, Brock said. You, me, kids at the school. We sponsor the league. Partnership matters. Titan never blinked. Caleb kept his tone level. You came to sell a kit and take a look. Just being helpful, Brock said. We've had chat. People repeat things they don't understand. Rumors dent values. That's your job title. My job is to solve problems. Brock glanced at the cooler by the door. Any trouble I should know about? If I need a number, I'll look it up, Caleb said. Brock recited digits anyway, forcing them into the air, as if speaking granted permission. Caleb repeated them back without inflection, a mirror to show the frame. The smile thinned. Brock tipped his cap, walked to the truck, and paused at the mailbox, long enough to note the nameplate. He pulled away without spinning tires, leaving a fine thread of dust over the corn. Caleb waited for the quiet to settle, then went back to the creek. Titan chose footing with care and kept a drinking distance. On a patch of silt, Caleb found boot marks, deep and fresh, toes pointed toward the sleeve. A second set overlapped, lighter. He measured and photographed them, traced scrape lines on a willow, where a mirror had grazed bark, and bagged bits of white plastic clinging to a twig. The bank read like a logbook, written in marks that most people pretend not to read. At the feed store he bought wire and mineral blocks. The clerk slid the items across the counter and lowered her voice, as if the walls could repeat her. You're on Amos's road, right? Watch for company truck. They volunteer for everything and keep lists. People pretend not to notice. Pretending has a cost, he said. She nodded once, and rang him up, as if only twine and salt had changed hands. On the drive home, a white pickup tucked in behind him for 2 miles, then turned off without signaling. He parked behind the house instead of out front, practical rather than paranoid, and walked the back way, to the steps with Titan flanking left. The dog sat facing the lane, patient, not tense. Prepared, after dinner, Caleb spread a plat map on the table and traced the creek with a carpenter's pencil. Upstream parcels bore family names. Farther north, a big rectangle carried green fields in bold. He wrote purchase dates from public records and compared them to the stamp on the tab. Not proof, but alignment, not guilt, but direction. Thunderheads muscled the horizon, bright rims hard against slate. Boards ticked as the house cooled. Titan rested his chin on Caleb's boot and kept one eye open, working the room's small sounds like a radio operator separating signal from static. Just after dark, movement stirred near the cottonwoods. Caleb stepped onto the porch and let the figure at the bank see him. A man in a cap raised a phone, snapped a photo toward the seam, and walked back to the road with steady indifference. Intimidation doesn't always arrive with fit. Sometimes it arrives with documentation and a smile. The old reflex urged him to force an answer, but he ran it through the filter he trusted. Avoid needless escalation, gather facts, time the push. He wrote the encounter clean in his notebook. He finished the night on the steps, Titan's muzzle warm against his ankle. Crickets stitched the dark. The creek breathed an altered breath. He thought of Amos's warnings, the clerk's careful caution, Brock's cheerful script, and the way a dog refused one drink and changed the shape of a day. Communities rarely fail in a single moment. They thin by inches when people decide a small lie is easier than a hard truth. When a chemical seam looks like nothing if you stand too far back. If you're listening now, ask yourself what seeps past your fence, because it's easier not to smell. Peace isn't passive. It is built by attention, guarded by neighbors, and paid for by those willing to notice. Caleb capped his pen, checked the latch, and promised that tomorrow would include a lab. A hard call, and one more walk to the bank, where the bubbles rose like a quiet, stubborn alarm. Late afternoon sagged under a bruised sky, wind dragging heat that smelled like hot pennies across the corn. Caleb tightened the fence wire and kept his mind on small facts of work. Tension, staple, knot. Tighten quartered the yard in measured arcs, tail level, mapping scent and sound, with the practiced calm of a partner trained to notice what people ignore. A gust rolled up from the draw and brought that faint metallic bite he could not name. Titan froze, sneezed once, and angled toward the cottonwoods. Caleb whistled a recall. Thunder popped somewhere beyond the flats. A pheasant burst from weeds, spooked Titan, and in 2 bounds the dog reached the bank. The creek looked harmless, tea-dark under roots, dragonflies stitching blue, but the air near the seam tingled like a battery on the tongue. Titan leaned, hesitated, lapped twice. The reaction hit like a thrown switch, his body locked, legs jerking, jaws clamped. Caleb slid leather between teeth to guard the tongue, eased him onto his side, counted breaths through the tremor, kept his voice level the way medics had taught him when noise tried to eat the world. Easy. Stay with me. I've got you. He dialed the number Amos had given him. Veterinary, Dr. Clara Evans. A calm voice said, Belgian Malinois. Caleb answered, seizing after creek exposure, likely industrial runoff. 10 minutes out. Keep him cool. No water by mouth, she said. I'll prep diazepam, fluids and charcoal. Barn doors are open. Drive safe but come now. He swaddled Titan in a tarp, lifted him with legs braced, and laid him on the truck seat. Rain began as freckles, then coins, then a sheet that hammered glass. Gravel went slick. The windmill on the ridge blurred into a ticking goat. Titan paddled at the air and made a low sound that hurt to hear. Caleb filled the cab with steadier noise. Hold the line, partner. Breathe. I'm right here. The clinic squatted behind the feed store, tin roof pinging under fresh drop. Clara met him with a gurney braid tucked under a cap, eyes sharp and steady. Inside, she said, guiding them to a steel table under soft lights. Her hands moved with quick economy. Thermometer, IV catheter, measured diazepam, charcoal, fluids hung and flowing, spasms eased by inches. She set an oximeter, drew blood, labeled vials with block letters that wouldn't wash away, and never wasted emotion. Described the exposure, she said. Chemical smell at my creek, Caleb answered. Hidden sleeve under the bank feeding a clear thread. Bubbles ride the seam. This is the second hit. The first one passed fast. Today it slammed him. Water cloudy, bright or clean. Clean with a battery taste. Her jaw tightened. I'm seeing cholinesterase inhibition, not a household. Industrial, organophosphates, or a cousin. Liver stress markers are up, and there's a chloride bump that pairs with dispersants used in pipeline flushing. I'll send full panels to the university, but this is enough to treat and to write down. She printed a preliminary report, signed it, and slid the page across. Probably industrial toxin exposure with clinical findings. Show it to anyone who doubts you. Lightning strobed the windows, turned the room white, then left it dim as the power blinked. Thunder rolled close enough to rattle jars in a cabinet. Clara adjusted a drip, checked the corneal reflex, and stepped back. Who put a feed at your bank? Greenfields has trucks on my road, Caleb said. A rep offered free tests. Big smile. Bigger logo. The supplies I ordered yesterday got canceled without explanation. The co-op clerk looked scared of her own register. Pressure wears clean boots and a friendly hat, she said. Document every contact. If my name on a statement helps, use it. A text slipped in with rapid results. Clara scanned the strip, nodded, and tapped a line with her pen. Chloripyrithose, analog plus, surfactant traces. That combination screams plant flushing. He stays for monitoring. Sit with him. Caleb rested a hand on Titan's shoulder and felt tremors settle to faint shiver. Through the drip and the rain, he heard the old drumbeat in his chest that once meant move, clear, secure. He had bought this place for quiet and found a mission wearing dust and boots. He kissed Titan's crown. Hold the line. Clara's voice soft. The instinct that brought him here can carry a town. whatever this becomes, remember why you act. Not pride, not rage. Love, and if you're reading along inside yourself, ask what bond would send you into weather when looking away feels easier. That answer decides more than any headline. When the sedative deepened and Titan slept in an even cadence, Caleb drove back into weather stacked like an anvil. The road shone, wipers worked, fields ran with brown sheets that braided toward the At the creek he turned off his lights and walked in the rain that soaked him in a minute. The smell hit again, sharp and insistent. He slid down where roots made rungs, lifted a camouflaged sleeve, and felt a faint hum with his fingers, as if a pump pushed from far upstream. Clear liquid threaded from the mouth, and combed the surface with tiny bubbles like a quiet breath. He photographed the setup, jarred water at marked intervals, and traced the route by touch to where the line dove under the bank. Upstream, he found sink points, scuffed dirt, and a fresh tire bite at a screened turnoff. Evidence felt thin without a lab, yet thin lines braid into rope if you keep them from fraying. Headlights washed the lane above, an engine idled, then cut, the way a hunter holds breath. Caleb killed his lamp, and counted through the hush between thunder beats. A door clicked, footsteps pressed wet gravel. Someone reached the edge, paused as if listening for a misstep, and withdrew. Proof without action, a reminder that he was seen. He let the spike pass, and waited until the vehicle rolled away. Back at the house, he found a note tucked under the screen. No letterhead, only clean type. Deliveries suspended due to account irregularities. Contact your representative. In the pantry, he saw a canceled feed drop, a withheld compressor part, and a verification hold on mineral blocks. Petty sabotage meant to waste hours in thin resolve. He sat at the table, dripping on the floorboards, and wrote everything with time, place, tone, the way a person writes for a judge who has never seen a cornfield. He printed 2 sets of photographs, and sealed them in separate envelopes, one for Clara's file, one for a lawyer he had not met. Wind found a loose sash and whistled like a kettle. Amos texted, "Storm threw nails at my roof. You okay?" "Working," Caleb replied. "Titan's stable." Amos again, "Want me to sit second shift so you can shut your eyes? I'll bring coffee." Caleb stared at the line of photos, pipe mouth, bubble seam, tire bite, and answered that he would manage. Evidence makes its own weather inside a room. Near midnight, the rain dulled to a patient whisper. He drove back to the clinic, and sat beside Titan until Pink returned to the gums and breathing evened. Clara brought coffee that tasted like burnt sugar and hope. "He's turning a corner," she said. "No heroics now, patience, fluids, watch and that sleeve is wired in place." Caleb said, "You can feel a tremor at the seam. Then we'll need a chain of custody for samples." She answered, "I can draft paperwork if you send it beyond the university, and if Greenfields keeps leaning, those dents become part of the wreck." Outside, thunder retreated in ragged grumbles, and power steadied across the flats. In that gray pause before dawn, resolve settled like silt after floodwater. Caleb would call the EPA line, hire a neutral lab, and knock on every door that could put steel around a creek treated as a drain. He would visit neighbors and place signed testimony beside charts. He would invite the reporter who keeps asking hard questions about corporate water. He would keep his notes clean, and his temper cleaner, because fear works best in silence, and silence ends when a community names what it refuses to swallow. He had not come to start another war. The ground had chosen its defender. The bond beside him made refusal impossible. By morning, the storm had crawled east, leaving a sticky film across the fields and a tin sky. Caleb drank black coffee on the steps, listening to the windmill's tired tick and Titan's steady breath at his boot. The dog's eyes were clearer after a night on fluids, though a wobble lingered. Caleb called Clara, gave an update, and promised to keep the pace slow. Then he pocketed her preliminary report, slid fresh prints into a folder, and steered toward Amos's lane. Amos was on his roof, tapping shingles back into line. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I need neighbors who will say what they know on paper," Caleb answered. "And I brought proof a lab can use." They spread the documents on a bench in the shed, Away from the glare, Amos read, thumb following without smearing ink. Then tapped a paragraph. I'll sign. Calves wouldn't keep milk down. Sophia says soy rose yellowed after storms. Javier should be part of this. Introduce me, Caleb said. At a small house tucked by a hedgerow, a child's bicycle leaned against a stump, chalk drawings bright on the drive. Javier opened with a cautious welcome. Sophia stood behind him, hair in a scarf, hands dusted with flour, the kitchen smelling of warm tortillas and dill. Caleb set the folder by a bowl of limes, and kept his voice even. My creek carries a clear seam that bubbles like soda, and tastes like a battery. It sent Titan into seizures twice. Clara's bloodwork shows organophosphate markers, and traces of industrial surfactant. That mix matches pipeline flushing. Parcels upstream belong to Greenfields. Sophia pulled a binder with columns neat enough to count without a ruler. We marked date 3 springs back. We switched varieties with their subsidy. Germination looked fine. Then patches turned copper along the wet end. Last year the pattern sharpened. We paid cash at the county lab and filed the envelopes where no one would ask questions. Javier added, 2 heifers foamed after drinking at the East Culvert. The vet gave charcoal and said parasites. We moved the herd and lost weight anyway. Our neighbor over the ridge sold early. Took a hit, then left before dawn. He had a new truck a week later. Caleb wrote names, dates and numbers, and offered to draft statements for signature. They agreed without hesitation. Fear is cheaper than courage, in a town where the sponsor's logo glows over the scoreboard. Choosing otherwise means carrying new costs on top of old bills. The heat thickened until the air smelled like wet iron. Dust rose at every step and hung like gauze. Caleb laid out a plan in quiet steps. I'll map the line from the plant to our draws, sample at marked intervals, freeze duplicates, and log the chain of custody. Tonight we watch the seam after midnight from the cottonwoods. I'll bring a long lens, a second body set for slower shutter, and 2 motion traps. If a truck dumps under the cover of dark, we catch enough to make denial expensive. Amos nodded. I'll take the north fence. The ruses can sit in the culvert where ruts stay fresh. Keep phones dark. If someone rolls up smiling, we wave and wish them a good evening. Sophia looked at Titan. He saved you and may save us. Please don't let them hurt him again. I won't, Caleb said. The dog rested his chin on her knee, sealing a pact. They spent the afternoon turning observation into preparation. Amos found a hedgerow notch that framed the service road. Javier walked the ditch and spotted a billboard post, perfect for a clan. Sophia listed plate numbers from the last month, many tied to the same company. Caleb checked batteries, formatted cards, verified timestamps, and pre-labeled evidence bags with water-resistant ink. Handwriting stayed calm because he forced it to. At dusk the county road fell to a hush, broken by one distant combine. Heat didn't relent. It changed shape, sagging over the flats like a wet canvas. Dust carried a chalk taste that clung to teeth. Fireflies blinked in short coats. Caleb cut across the backfield with Titan heeling left. Keeping to the shadow, he tucked one camera into a forked branch that held the turnout in frame. He mounted the second on the billboard post, set for long exposure, and tested a motion trap. Night pulled tight. The creek went glassy. An owl traded slow questions with a mate. At 11, the breeze died, and left the air warm as breath. Titan kept his head down, ears tuned to small changes. Caleb settled behind a root, and let his pulse sink to the water's hush. Waiting had always been the hardest part. Patience demanded trust in gear, position, plan and humility to accept you might still miss what mattered. Headlights carved the ridge after midnight. They vanished, reappeared lower, slipped behind willows and surfaced at the service road. The engine idled with a diesel rattle, then eased into watchful quiet. The truck wore the green leaf logo. A second vehicle slid in behind it. Lights off. Doors opened. Boots met gravel. Voices came in clipped fragments. The grammar of men trained not to be overheard. Caleb lifted the long lens and clipped the camera to the root. He shot a burst with ISO pushed high, shutter barely fast enough to hold a shape, then switched to the slower body. A white plume arced from a rear valve, mist catching the glow and falling into the culvert like milk poured into tea. The seam began to fizz in a smooth band. One man shielded a flashlight with his palm. Another checked a clipboard. Someone chuckled softly. Rehearsed in cold, Amos's text buzzed. Got the angle. Plates obscured. Ruiz. Silhouettes. Not faces. Caleb bracketed exposures, then checked motion stills. The frames showed the truck, the men, the plume, and a blur where numbers should sit. He recorded 30 seconds of video that looked like an impressionist painting of a crime, and hated every pixel. It would force questions, not close a case. When the valve clicked shut, the men wiped fittings with rags and tossed them into a bin. The truck rolled out the way it came, lights low, back window reflecting a leaf in a field. Silence returned in a rush that sounded like rain, though the sky stayed dry. Titan exhaled as if he had held his breath for both of them. They met at the billboard after the engines vanished. Amos leaned his rifle against the post. Muzzle down, safety on. Javier checked the clamp. Sophia watched the dark ribbon where bubbles combed the scene. They think we're too tired to look, she said. Caleb scrubbed through footage. Grain crawled across every frame. Faces lost to shadow, numbers eaten by flare. The plume remained, bright and undeniable, its path tracing into the culvert like a drawn arrow. It won't convict, he said, but it makes lying harder. Amos nodded. Then we push while memory's crisp. We take this to Clara, call the hotline, and drop a copy at the paper. We knock on doors at dawn and ask for signatures. Fear says wait. Justice says start now. If you're weighing risk against comfort, ask yourself when you last stepped forward. Because silence felt like a worse wound. That answer turns rooms. The first thin seam of light trembled at the horizon, lifting fields into dull silver. Heat rose from the soil. Dust hummed like static. Caleb pocketed cards, bagged the rags used to handle gear, and sealed evidence bags. Titan pressed close as they walked through rows that whispered like old paper. The day ahead would demand calls, statements, backups, and the kind of patience that refuses to mistake calm for surrender. The fight had moved out of rumor and into record. Caleb squared his shoulders and headed for the road. Late summer night pressed low like a damp lid. Air warm and still, dust hanging where trucks had chewed the lane. Caleb rolled the perimeter road, in low gear, with lights off. Engine a hush. Titan curled on the floorboard, the tin box of camera cards, Clara's report, and signed statements sat belted behind him. A pump launcher loaded with beanbag rounds lay within reach. Flashlight taped to the tube. He would not become the man he left overseas, yet he refused to let hired fear claim this road, or this dog. At the cottonwoods, he stopped and listened. Corn hissed, the creek moved like a black ribbon, its chemical seam a breath he could taste. Titan gave a soft alert, the sound that meant motion where routine said none. A pale blink appeared far down the lane, as if a phone had turned in a careless hand. He braked and let the cab sink into the shadow. A white pickup drifted into view, with its running lights masked. Another followed, then a third, sliding into a wedge. Faces hid, but the rhythm of men who felt bold behind steel was unmistakable. He shifted to park, pocketed the keys, and touched Titan's shoulder. Down. The dog flattened, eyes steady. Caleb slid out the passenger side, used the hood as cover, and scanned through the gap between the fender and the tire. A flashlight swept the yard, asserting control. He looked away from the beam, counted shapes, and plotted lanes. One crouched by the mailbox in a thin plate carrier. Two stood at the culvert, one cradling a launcher. Another lingered at the gate, with a baton. "You're trespassing," Caleb called, tone level. "Leave now. This is recorded." Laughter answered, short and dismissive. A pepper ball popped against his hood, and burst into a white cloud. Sting scorched his sinuses. He tucked his face into his sleeve, and rotated under the frame, to a new cover. Titan whined once. Caleb slid the beanbag launcher along the gravel, rose, swung his beam low across his shins, and fired into a thigh. The thump sounded like a book slammed shut. The man staggered, shocked by pain without holes. "Back up," Caleb said. Next shots hit knees. They tried to flank the passenger side. He fired again, one into a forearm. the next into a hip, each round chosen to stop without breaking. The baton man charged and swung for the mirror. Caleb stepped inside the arc, fired at the lid leg, and the baton skittered while the man folded. Dog first, someone at the culvert snarled, lifting his tube. Something hard inside Caleb tightened. He moved 2 steps left, broke the shooter's rhythm with light, and sent a beanbag into the shooter's ribs. Before the pepper burst could launch, the tube dropped. Another pickup rolled closer, bumper pushing a wall of chalk that cut the world into cones of dirty light. The men advanced behind it, using the hood like a moving shield. Caleb pressed tighter to the wheel. To shape a lane, he fired 2 more rounds into the ankles, keeping the targets honest without escalating force. "Leave the lane. Get off this property," he said. Brock Sutton stepped from the second truck with his cap low, and a neighborly smile that had learned to lie. "Evening, Hart. Keep this calm. You've got a box that belongs to lawyers. Hand it over. We forget a messy misunderstanding." "Evidence doesn't belong to you," Caleb said. "Misunderstandings don't arrive with gas and pepper." Brock twitched the smile. "Beanbags count as discharge. Deputies love tidy notes about volatile vets. Don't make me escalate." "Non-lethal, documented, and defensive," Caleb said. "Walk away." Brock tipped his chin. A contractor lobbed a gas canister over the hood. It bounced off the windshield and rolled toward the floorboard. Caleb popped the rear door, slid an empty feed tub with his boot, and trapped the canister under it. Titan stayed down, discipline holding the line training had drawn. 2 men tried the creek side, trusting the brush to hide them. Caleb shifted to the rear corner, kept the truck between them and the cab, and fired into dirt at their feet to break stride. One slid on pea gravel and went down. The other raised a flashlight to blind him. Caleb took the light instead of the face, hit the wrist behind it, then the knee. The beam fell. The man retreated, limping. "Cameras on," Caleb said. He hit the horn in a long blast. Sound rolled down the creek like a siren. Brock's tone shifted from honey to wire. "You're outnumbered," he said. "You want to fight asphalt too?" "I'll fight secrecy," Caleb said. "The road will hold." The baton man tried to stand again, wobbling. Caleb racked, aimed at dirt, and fired so the crack and thump landed together. From the county road came an old 8-cylinder growl, light bar dark. Greenfield's crew heard it the way coyotes hear a latch drop. Brock weighed the math and didn't like it. "We'll be in touch," he said, as if the last minutes were a failed sales call. He rotated a hand, and his men climbed aboard, coughing, limping, blinking. Trucks slid back the way they had come, lights still off until distance made them brave. Caleb stayed under the wheel, counting breaths to pull his pulse from red toward blue. Titan lifted his head, placed it on Caleb's shin, and waited. Caleb checked paws, eyes and lungs. He whispered thanks into fur that smelled of dust and clinic soap. The cruiser swung into the lane, and stopped with a respectful gasp. Sheriff Darby climbed out with his flashlight low, palm open where Titan could read intent. He studied paint scuffs, beanbags on gravel, and a dented grill across the way. "You all right?" Darby asked. "Fine," Caleb said. "Non-lethal, recorded." Darby nodded. "You just told someone their plan has a spine to push against. That makes them clumsy." "They already did," Caleb said, tapping the tub. "Gas, pepper, demands for evidence. I'll file the report. I'll bring photos and statements." "Do." Darby's. Caleb cased the launcher and belted the tin box into the passenger seat. Titan shifted upright, pressed against his knee, asking without noise for a signal that the fight was over. Caleb palmed the dog's chest and gave a single nod. The night didn't cool, and the dust didn't fall, yet the lane felt altered, as if the ground had accepted a line. He looked at the creek, and thought of the seam breathing under the cutbank, the neighbors who had turned on lights instead of televisions, the statement he still needed to write, and the truth his training reserved for this life. Victory was not the loudest gun. It was a plan held under pressure. He had refused to become the destroyer he escaped, and still protected the partner who trusted him. He put the truck in gear, rolled until gravel smoothed beneath the tires, and drove home with Titan leaning close, both of them breathing through the heat like men crossing a desert, just wide enough to endure. He logged times, bagged beanbags as evidence, and set an alarm before dawn, because documentation wins slow wars when bullets would poison tomorrow. Dawn arrived with a washed pewter light and a sky already flexing for another storm. Caleb brewed coffee, checked Titan's gums, and read Clara's overnight note, enzymes trending down, hydration steady, temperament watchful. He kissed the dog's crown, left him on a quilt, and drove toward town, with a folder heavy enough to tilt the passenger seat. The lot outside Clara's clinic shimmered early. Inside, steel surfaces glowed, and printers hummed. Clara met him at the back table, hair braided tight, eyes clear from resolve, not sleep. "We assemble this like a field kit," she said, tugging on gloves. "Primary results, chain of custody forms, photographs, maps, sworn statements, duplicates sealed for separate delivery. No gaps big enough for a lawyer to crawl through." Javier and Sofia arrived with a binder of dated logs, seed receipts, rainfall charts, pump schedules, and a thumb drive. Amos came last, hat damp from roof work, cedar tar clinging faintly, surgical lamps pooled clean light, labeled envelopes weighted in rows. Clara taped templates to the surface, and assigned roles with a calm that understood triage. Caleb sorted photographs, the pipe mouth clouding water, the blurry plume from the midnight dump, tire ruts at the turnout, frames catching Brock's posture beside a clipboard. He numbered each print, matched coordinates, and wrote times in block letters. Sofia typed cover summaries that left no room for misreading. Javier compiled a table, linking crop bronzing to wind direction, irrigation dates, storm events, and the creek's flow rate. Amos signed his declaration, and added the name of a foreman, who bragged at the feed store that compliance is a handshake, if your hand is big enough. Stacks rose like low buildings. "Who carries the master?" Amos asked. "I will," Caleb said. Amos first duplicate, Ruiz family, second. Clara third. Another goes to Sheriff Darby. Digital copies ride separately, encrypted. Clara nodded. "EPA's regional office takes electronic submissions and couriers. I'll log the chain of custody on medical data. You handle field pieces." Grease pencil marks subdivided tasks. Pens moved. Stamps thudded. The room smelled of iodine and toner. Outside, thunder crawled parallel to the horizon, while reeds bent, rehearsing for whatever was coming. When packets stood stacked and corner-clipped, Caleb photographed the array and texted Darby, "Filing today. Heads up." They drove to a shipping center in the county seat, where cold air blew hard from vents. The clerk read addresses, printed tracking labels, and glanced at the company names. "Big shipment," she said. "Important," Caleb answered. "It deserves a safe ride." Cartons took tape with a stern rip and slid to a separate shelf for pickup. Clara stepped into the hallway and called the regional office. Her voice rang like steel wrapped in courtesy. "We're submitting a veterinary toxicology report, environmental samples, photographic evidence, and sworn statements," she said. "Please confirm receipt and assign an investigator." They emailed the digital kit from a coffee shop, with reliable internet, then drove to the sheriff's office. Darby read signatures slowly, weighed photographs, and tapped a finger on the gas canister print from the ambush. "This will rattle cages," he said. "Expect noise." Noise arrived before the sandwiches were gone. A green truck rolled past with fresh wax on its hood. Brock smiled through the window, like a pastor after a budget vote. Caleb's phone buzzed 3 times. A letterhead from Greenfield's legal department, alleging trespass, interference, defamation, and misuse of images. A notice to Clara from a board-aligned committee, demanding an immediate accreditation review, and a safety concern filed against the clinic for improper chemical handling. Clara read each once, then folded her arms and smiled without showing teeth. "If they were confident, they wouldn't risk theater," she said. "I'll answer the review with record-keeping that shines. Keep receipts for every minute." Sofia translated the defamation letter into plain speech, then laughed once without joy. "They want fear to do the work," she said. Javier squeezed her hand. Amos spat into the grass and stayed quiet for half a minute. When he spoke, words came like fence posts set true. "My father farmed during the bitter years when dirt reached the men with clean boots, said the wind would keep blowing, and shovels would keep breaking, and they took land on paper while we prayed for rain. We outlasted them by tying ourselves to each other." Lightning etched white branches over the far ridge. They split into tasks. Caleb and Amos drove upstream to photograph culverts, marked with fresh scuffs. The Ruizes stopped at 2 farms with quiet porches and returned with signed notes tucked under receipt. Clara parked at the clinic, assembled her accreditation response with citations and temperature logs, and called a mentor at the university for a formal letter of support. Titan rode with Caleb, chin on the console, eyes steady. Wind smelled like metal, and hot clover. Dust lifted from shale shoulders and hung like gauze. Afternoon turned grainy. Greenfield's trucks loitered at intersections long enough to be noticed, then drifted off when Caleb raised his camera. A pickup idled at the clinic driveway, and left a flyer taped to the glass, a smiley leaf announcing a community information session at the high school gym with free refreshments and balanced signs. Clara peeled it off with gloved fingers, slid it into a bag marked evidence, and locked the door. By evening, the digital kit had reached the EPA. An auto-reply generated a case number and a timestamp. 30 minutes later, a human response landed. Investigator assigned. Initial actions pending. Preserve originals. Do not alter scenes. Darby texted. Patrols added near the plant and around your place. Keep calls short. Counterspin followed. A social post featured a photo of Clara treating a calf, captioned, "We love our local vets." Almost immediately, another account added that her clinic relies on activist grants. An unsigned op-ed argued that undermining the largest employer harms family. An email urged Caleb to attend the gym event, to learn facts and avoid costly mistakes. He saved everything to the case folder and refused to let anger steer him. Restraint would keep doors open when shouting would feed a show. Night closed with a humid heat refused to leave, though darkness had erased the sun. The creek breathed its false breath. Caleb sat on the porch with Titan at his feet, dossiers sealed in a fireproof box beside the door, and turned Amos's story over in his mind. The Dust Bowl lived in that voice. Storms thick as walls, food stretched thin, families moving west with mattresses tied to roofs, and the few who stayed because leaving would have killed something they could not name. Amos had said his father tied a rope between the house and the barn, so you could find the path when noon went black. You built a life, not a resume, the old man told him. When wind makes noon look like midnight, tie a rope between house and barn, then tie another between your heart and your neighbor's door. Caleb pictured that rope, imagined it running porch to porch, clinic to kitchen, barn to school. He felt the tug whenever a truck slowed in the lane or a flyer appeared on the glass. Thunder shouldered closer, trailed by air that smelled like rain hammered on hot metal. He checked locks, set a camera on the sill, and returned to the steps. Titan leaned against his shin. In the corridor of quiet before lightning, he allowed one private truth to surface. Peace isn't an empty field. It's people refusing to abandon one another. If you're reading in silence, ask which rope you would tie when a bright logo tells you to stay seated. That answer decides the story your town inherits. Spray dust rose ahead of the first hard drops. When the storm crossed his fields, the house rattled. Water pounded the porch roof. The creek swelled. Downstream a culvert groaned. Caleb breathed through it until his pulse matched the rain. Resolve settled, like silt after a flood. The dossier had left their hands and entered a machine that could grind lies into filings if fed with patience. Greenfields had answered with glare and theater. The ground still held what it had seen, and the town carried longer memory than any press release. In that charged dark with Titan warm against his boot and the sky arguing over the plains, Caleb felt the line harden inside him. He would keep building the case. He would keep his temper clean, and he would not let intimidation edit the truth. Tomorrow he would knock on more doors, wrap more rope between houses, and make sure every signature held. The storm moved east, and left the air tasting of iron and promise. Caleb gathered the tracking slips, checked the fireproof box, and whispered goodnight to the dog who had found the wound in the land. Behind the cottonwoods, thunder spoke once more, distant now, like a judge testing a gavel before the hearing began. Dust lay on the windowsills of the community hall, like sifted flour, and the floorboards kept scuffs from dances, auctions, and funerals. A fan rattled above a crooked lectern, pushing warm air that smelled of hay, coffee, and motor oil. Folding chairs lined the center aisle. At the front, a long table held binders, labeled envelopes, sample jars, maps, and a fireproof box. Caleb stood there with Titan at heel, the dog's ears pricked and calm, while Amos watched from the back beside Javier and Sofia Ruiz. Neighbors filled rows, hats on knees, shoulders tight, a murmur running like wind through dry corn. Greenfield's men arrived together in pressed polos, their leaf logos bright as stickers on new fruit. Sheriff Darby leaned near the door, hand resting on a notepad, eyes neutral and awake. Caleb began with the creek. He spread a flat map and anchored the corners with jars drawn from different points. He traced the line that bubbled like soda and tasted like a battery, described the sleeve wedged under the cut bank, and the ruts at the hidden turnout. Then he lifted photos. The grainy plume falling from a rear valve, silhouettes working under shadow, a valve handle shining wet. He did not dramatize. He named timestamps, coordinates, sample numbers, and the chain of custody. He held up Clara Evans' preliminary report, showing trolinesterase inhibition and surfactant traces, consistent with industrial flushing compounds. Clara, standing beside him, confirmed temperature logs and storage protocols. Javier opened their binder and showed crop bronzing mapped to storm dates. Sofia added veterinary invoices and rainfall charts. Amos signed his declaration and read a line about wells turning sour. Every document slid into a packet and back out again, so the room could see that nothing was hidden. A man in a leaf polo raised his hand without waiting to be called. "This is confusion," he said, smiling at both aisles. "Greenfields funds scholarships, repairs roads, and meets federal thresholds. Your pictures are blurry. Your claims are reckless. Our tests show safety." Caleb let the voice finish before answering. "Thresholds are not exemptions," he said. "A valve open at night is not safe. This report is Clara's, not mine. These signatures belong to your neighbors. Look at their hands." Hands roughened by work lifted the packet sheets again. Someone in the middle rows muttered that his calves coughed after drinking at the East Culvert. A woman with a seed cap said her water began tasting like pennies. Another neighbor whispered that deliveries stopped after he asked a question at the co-op. The room shifted from murmur to attention. The back doors opened, hard enough to shake a hymn board. Two people in field boots and agency windbreakers stepped in, badges clipped high, followed by a woman with a camera bag and a recorder. The taller agent carried a slim case. The other held a tablet and a sealed envelope. The journalist scanned faces and logos, then moved to the side where the light was good. The taller agent introduced himself and read the title of the order. "By authority of the court, the Environmental Protection Agency is executing a warrant to inspect the Greenfields plant, associated pipelines and specified discharge points, and to seize records relevant to potential unlawful releases." He placed the envelope on the table and asked for acknowledgement. Darby stepped forward, read and nodded. The shorter agent asked for the locations of culverts, named in the affidavits. Caleb pointed to marks on the map. Javier traced the route, upstream with a finger that shook once, then steadied. Sofia named the side roads where trucks sat after midnight. Clara handed over a duplicate of Titan's toxicology panels. The journalist clicked her pen and confirmed spellings, dates and sample code. The leaf polo man stood very straight. "Our counsel will object to overreach," he said. "File your objection," the shorter agent replied. "The order stands." A neighbor behind row 4 laughed under his breath. The sound startled and on. The journalist asked the room for additional materials. People who rarely spoke in public began to stand. They described sour wells, headaches on hot days, heifers foaming after storms, yellow bands along drainage lines, and letters that canceled supplies for no reason. Names went on to form. Jars clinked on the table. Pens moved. A retired teacher offered a notebook with truck plates copied at dawn across 2 summers. An irrigator held up a phone log showing calls that hung up when he said his parcel number. Small pieces, ordinary and stubborn, made a shape larger than one farm. Caleb laid the last envelope on the table, the one sealed for the paper. He kept his tone level. "We will keep duplicates in separate places," he said. "We will verify and correct, not shout. We will not let intimidation set the tone. If you fear retaliation, bring your records to me, to Clara, or to the sheriff. The more we carry together, the less any single truck can crush." He looked down at Titan, who watched the door and then the aisle with patient focus. "If you are listening and weighing whether to step forward, Ask what price your town pays when good people keep quiet. That answer writes more than any headline. Silence settled, not empty, but chosen. The taller agent split the team. One group left with Darby and 2 deputies for the plan. The other gathered volunteers to guide inspections at the listed culverts. The journalist took the envelope and promised to triple source every line before printing. The leaf polo man stepped outside and bent into his phone like a... Inside, neighbors formed a line at Clara's table to sign affidavits. Amos moved through the rows, steadying hands, and saying names so each signature landed true. Javier copied charts for 2 elders who wanted to brief church trustees. Sophia organized jars by stream mile and time of draw. A teacher opened the windows. Air crossed the hall from the shade trees, and heat loosened its grip by a degree. The journalist returned for one last question. What do you want from this beyond a headline? She asked Caleb. He answered without raising his voice. Remediation, accountability, and enough daylight that no one tries this again. I want Titan to drink from our creek. I want grandchildren to play under cottonwoods without a rash. I want neighbors to speak without checking who is parked outside. She wrote it down word for word. As the meeting broke, the leaf trucks idled in the lot with new caution. Drivers watched the agent's car instead of families at the door. Darby coordinated by radio and then spoke with Caleb beneath the overhang. Expect filings and noise, he said. Answer with records in steady hand. Caleb nodded. We will. Amos clapped his shoulder, then told the rope story again. Brief, the way a father would speak at a table when storms make noon dark as midnight. People listened and nodded. A mother in the back whispered that she would tie one end to her porch today. Javier promised to bring an extra binder to the next meeting. Sophia hugged Clara in a quick, fierce motion, and breathed out as if she had been holding air for months. Outside, late summer light shifted to a kinder gold. The sky still pressed, but the edge had softened. A breeze ran through cottonwoods and laid dust back down. Children counted license plates while adults made lists of errands and statements. Caleb scratched Titan's neck and felt a long breath unwind from a place behind his ribs he rarely reached. The fight had not ended. Warrants begin processes that grind slowly and hard. Lawyers would file motions. Corporate accounts would post glossy claims. Depositions would demand long afternoons. But fear had lost its favorite room. People who had watched from the screen doors now stepped onto the ground. They traded numbers and promised rides. Windows that had stayed shut in the heat tilted open to catch a new draft. Caleb locked the binders in the fireproof box and loaded the truck. Neighbors slapped the fender, not to own it, but to mark the moment. Amos drove off to check a culvert with 2 agents. The ruses left to organize a list of families needing water tests. Clara returned to the clinic to prepare for questions from a board that had already drafted a review. Darby nodded once and headed toward the highway. The journalist walked to her car with her notes pinned under one hand like a ledger that might finally balance. Caleb looked back at the hall and saw faces that had learned their weight. He touched Titan's shoulder. The dog looked up and then toward the creek, as if to say the work still waited. They turned onto the gravel lane, with dust rising behind them in a softer plume, and the day, though heavy, felt possible again. Today, autumn arrived like a patient correction after months of heat, edging the flats with cool mornings, long shadows and air that smelled of hay instead of hot metal. Word traveled as confirmation. The regional office suspended Greenfield's permits pending inspection, and the board fired the site manager for procedural failures. Leaf trucks quit loitering at intersections. Brock vanished from the lanes, replaced by a spokesperson behind a fence. A release promised audits, listening sessions, and community partnership. Nobody clapped. People had learned to wait for deeds. Caleb kept notes as if any page might be the hinge. He took Titan to Clara for follow-ups, listened while she reviewed panels, and heard a verdict he clung to. Improving, hydrated, clear-eyed, limit exertion near noon. Titan's steady gaze returned. The dog hopped into the pickup with crisp economy. At home, duplicates of every record sat in a fireproof box. Matching sets lived at Darby's office and with the ruses. The case had moved from whisper to trackable process. The county paper ran a careful story with photographs of jars, maps, and cottonwoods over water that finally smelled like water. The journalist printed the case number, the judge's name, and hotline contacts. Greenfields bought a full-page ad under a smiling headline. Responses looked small beside the facts. Families who had kept receipts pulled binders from cupboards. Legal aid from the city opened an office in the church basement and began shaping a class action. Caleb helped without holding the center. He drove elders to appointments, walked parcels with younger neighbors to find forgotten culverts, and led Titan along the creek where bubbles had thinned to ripples. EPA staff in work boots took samples at dawn, logged GPS points and traced drainage paths after rain. They listened more than they spoke. One agent admitted the midnight footage would never win awards, then smiled because poor exposure still forced a warrant. Imperfect evidence can open doors. Leaves along the draw shifted from tired green to copper. Families arrived with shovels and saplings, planting willows and cottonwoods along scoured banks. Children pushed soil with small boots, while elders tamped the ground with slow certainty. Coffee steamed in tall urns. A local trio played under the hall's overhang. Laughter carried, not loud but unafraid. The town named the morning Restoration Day. Amos retold the rope story, then led Caleb to a scar where floodwater had torn a curve. "We lost ground here," he said. "Money wouldn't stretch to rock, so we planted stake. Roots stitched what machines couldn't." He looked at the line of neighbors across the bank. People worked the same way. They set saplings, tied cloth strips to mark watering, and stood quietly, listening to water move like breath. Clara arrived with a cooler and one-page handouts detailing what her clinic would do at no cost. Screenings, livestock checks, canine panels, well sampling through neutral labs, and guidance on chain of custody. Some tried to. She pointed to a grant line from a rural health foundation and told them to keep the money for winter feed. A mentor praised her records. The board closed its review with a brief note, "Compliant." Weeks slid toward harvest. The plant sat quietly while contractors dug toward a buried line near a bend. Trucks hauled soil under tarps. A spokesperson promised improvements and independent monitors through spring. The fired manager left town. A replacement kept to prepared statements. Brock sent no text. Depositions began. Drivers admitted for night discharges when storms expanded capacity. One revealed a bonus clause tied to throughput compliance. Another described pressure to optimize during maintenance. Plaintiffs recounted headaches, rashes, lost calves, bronzed rows and sour wells. A judge compelled logs, training manuals and flush schedules. The record thickened until rumor lost oxygen. Attorneys filed the class action. Remediation timelines and damages moved into the calendar. Through it all, life found a rhythm that did not abandon vigilance. Caleb repaired fence lines, rebuilt a porch brace, and moved his mattress upstairs. Sleep still kinked when engines downshifted after midnight. He used the method medics taught him: sit, breathe, name 5 true objects. Return to now. Titan leaned into his shins until breath evened. Each morning they walked the boundary. The creek carried the mineral scent of sand and leaves instead of solvent. Neighbors celebrated durable changes. A grandmother said her tap lost its metallic bite. A teacher reported fewer headaches. A rancher showed photographs of calves with clear eyes. The paper printed images of a corroded sleeve pulled from roots like a wicked splinter. An EPA caption explained violations in plain language. A sidebar listed resources for towns facing similar fights. Calls arrived from valleys that had never heard of their county until the story traveled. Autumn deepened toward frost. Corn dried to a whisper. Cottonwoods dropped coins of light across new plantings. On a still afternoon, Caleb walked the creek with Titan and watched willow leaves tremble in a breeze that barely existed. He remembered moving through foreign streets under sirens and flares, and a promise made in a cramped barracks, to someday live where calendars mattered more than curfew. That day arrived not through silence but through purpose. Peace had become a verb. Costs continued. Hours that might have fixed a gate became witness meetings. Friends learned patience when calls ran long. Enemies learned patience when intimidation failed. Yet the trade felt right. Every affidavit carried the weight of hands that shovel, stitch, lift, teach, milk, fix, and cook. That weight gave records moral gravity. Greenfields kept lawyers busy, but efforts to smear witnesses stalled under audits. timestamps and stubborn transparent. The action moved forward, slow, visible, and hard to derail. The hall hosted another meeting before harvest. Fewer polos, more families. The agenda ran on time. An EPA official summarized remediation underway, penalties likely, independent monitors contracted. Plaintiffs' counsel outlined the next steps and warned against triumphal noise. Caleb spoke last and kept it plain. He thanked neighbors for records, patience and courage, then asked them to keep ropes tied between houses when winter set in. Amos added a line about dust storms and long memory. People nodded and wrote down tasks. Evenings came early. Stars arrived sharp. On the porch, Titan rested his head on Caleb's knee, eyes half closed, ears still reading the lane. Crickets stitched the dark. A screen door banged and then settled. Caleb felt tired, not hollow. Purpose-filled corners that fear had tried to claim. He whispered thanks into Titan's fur for the warning that turned a creek from hazard into witness. The dog thumped his tail once, then watched the cottonwoods like a sentry happy to stay. If you've walked this road with them, consider joining the circle they built. Subscribe for more frontier dramas where ordinary people turn toward trouble and hold the line together. Share a story from your town, your field, your block. Times when neighbors tied rope between doors and refused to abandon one another. Drop a comment, pass this along, and bring someone who needs a reminder that courage scales when hands interlock. The fight for clean water, honest work and open truth doesn't end here. It grows with every voice. Stand with them, stand with each other.